Good evening and welcome to the Asylum. It's me, Gunnar, in a chair of destiny. Not joined by my able compatriots this week because Daz is distant. He is on his way. We are, of course, though, joined by the Multidimensional Show. Good evening, Rachel, first off.
Good evening, Ian.
How are you, lovely?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Keeping warm in this terrible weather we've got.
Yeah.
We're also joined by Steve Nobel as well.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Wicked. Pleased to meet you, Steve. As Rachel takes a quick sip of a coffee. I wish I'd got mine ready as well. We're also joined by last week's guest or previous week's guest, Micheal Feeley as well. Good evening, Micheal.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, everyone.
Hello. And also, as well, the very lovely Cara St. Louis as well is on the line. Good evening, Cara.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, this is your second time on the Asylum, isn't it?
It is. Thank you.
Wicked. Now, guys, if you can, just introduce yourselves for us quickly as well. Rachel, tell us a little bit about the Multidimensional Show and what it is that you're doing there.
Well, the Multidimensional Show was set up in 2016, so about a year and a half ago in September it started, and it was just sort of a brainstorming idea that was quickly developed into a whole conference. And it's a day where we have researchers, philosophers, scientists, explorers, artists that come together and take the audience on a voyage of discovery.
A voyage of discovery. I love this because you do a number of different things, don't you, Rachel? I mean, the show is about, as you say, bringing about greater awareness to our wider reality, combining music, art, research, explorers of the field, including metaphysics, history, science, esoterica, channeling, and first-hand recollected experiences of other lives, dimensions. I mean, how do you even put a set list together for a show like this?
Normally there's a theme that occurs when I get speakers approaching me or I approach speakers. So this one that's coming up in May is called The Force in Nature, and it become apparent why it's called that. I picked on the different themes that are emerging through the different talks to create a central theme. And yeah, it's almost like the Multidimensional Show is almost like a show in itself. I call it a name like a show because it's multi-level, and I include art and music into the day as well.
Do you guys think that's important, that this is a rounded discussion, that this is a multifaceted discussion?
I think it can. It has its place. Yeah, you bet. I mean, it's important to have your solid, sovereign sort of what you're bringing kind of thing. But it's also very, very important. It's kind of an antidote to that, which can be over the top, to have a group of people that come together and have to discuss like a wider, put a puzzle together perhaps, or have conversations about, like, for example, I'm looking forward to the show because I know that we've got these wonderful people coming, and also Maria Wheatley, who Rachel hasn't introduced that bit of it yet. But these are people who are on parallel streams, but these streams can be very different one from the other.
That's so true.
Significant ways. So I've told Micheal, I haven't talked to Steve yet, but I've told Micheal I'm really looking forward to talking to him when we all get together. So
now this is one of the things that I love about shows like this, where we bring all of you guys together in this kind of round table format, because my job goes out the window. I'm not gonna lie. The set questions and the things that I should be asking literally just go by the wayside, but that's a good thing, because I think when we're talking about what we're talking about, like you say, Cara, it's so multifaceted. There's so many different angles. I guess you probably agree, Micheal, as well, that there'll be plenty of speakers there yourself that you'll be tapping for information, finding out different life experiences and other parts of your journey as well, I suppose.
Well, absolutely. No one is ever the complete article. No one is ever whole. So it helps to have many different facets to add to your own toolbox. So it'll be interesting to hear what the other guest speakers have to say as well, because anything that can sort of enrich my knowledge will always be a benefit that I'm interested in being involved in.
Wicked. Rachel, then tell us just quickly, how can we find out about Multidimensional Show? When's it on? And who are all your speakers as well?
Well, it's on Saturday, the 12th of May, and it starts at 9 o'clock and at 5 o'clock. We have 4 speakers. We have Steve, who will be, Micheal, who'll be starting at the beginning of the day with his talk, which is going to be based on his last book, The Secrets of the Pyramids, A Message for Humanity. Then we've got Steve Nobel, who'll be talking a bit later on in the morning, and he'll be talking about the ascension process and the star seeds that are here on this planet to kind of help with the process into 5-dimension reality. And then we have a guided meditation with Attic Teas, who are not with us on this interview, but they'll be just giving green tea to all of the audience and then guiding us through a meditation to sort of tap into the wisdom of the plant. So very much in a kind of shamanic way and a very gentle way with these tea meldings that they do.
I really enjoyed that last time. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah,
that was really cool.
Special, wasn't it?
Didn't we pay like homage to the plant gods, I think, or something like this?
Oh yeah. I think there was so much in that meditation, actually, wasn't there?
There was. It was really cool. I mean, obviously, these guys are saying, learn about the multidimensional nature of the tea plant and how it can use or help humans on a physical, mental, as well as spiritual level. So that was really fascinating. Not only is it the health benefits from the food, but also, I guess, the way in which you approach the things that you put in your body and the way in which you feel about it as well.
Yes, with intention. And that presence with the plant that you're consuming. There's so much more to it than just the nutrients, the physical nutrients that you get. So I love that approach.
It's going to be busy. I love it.
It's going to be very packed, yeah. It's very multidimensional. So in the afternoon we've got Cara St. Louis, who will be delivering the lecture I'm Magician, and that's based on Cara's massive research on the Fae, which is a seed race that came here millions of years ago. She'll talk more about that. And then we have Maria Wheatley, who's taken the place of Shane Bales, who unfortunately can't join us. And Maria Wheatley is a very well-established leading expert on sacred sites and dowsing. And she'll be doing a talk based on her latest book, The Druidic Soul Star Astrology.
Which is wicked. I can't wait for that one as well, because I've got a couple of Maria's books here, actually.
Yeah.
And I have had contact with her in the past as well. I think the work that she does, and you, Cara, as well, surrounding ancient sites is really, really interesting. We'll come to you first then, Cara, quickly. Just tell us quickly, what is I'm Magician?
Well, I'm Magician right now is kind of a culmination work. It's kind of a natural consequence of this entire journey. Specific part of the journey that I've been on, which started in 2010. It started, I always say this because this was the pivotal moment in where I'm at right now, kicked me onto this path. It was following the death of my mother, and that was relating to the aerosol war that we're undergoing now, which most of us call chemtrails. Anyway, that investigation led me to a 5-year investigation into social engineering, which led me to ask the question, which we should all be asking, which is why? Why me? Why us? Why now? Okay, and so that led me quite naturally into delving into who we are. I started to work with Maria Wheatley years ago, and it was really at her prompting that I started looking into, she wanted me to look into the origins of the Celtic hearth, and that's what took me to my work on the Fae, which in fact turns out to be I think, provably one of the reasons I'm actually here in this time and space. The work that she and I did together is called Guardians of Blood and Fire, The Search for the Celtic Heart. All right. And the work that's underway right now is called I'm Magician. Okay. These are answers to that question. Why us? Why now? Okay. Those avenues kind of underscore that we're powerful, magical creatures. Yeah. We're so powerful that job one is to stop us from remembering who we are. And as a result of that, become the creators that we really are. So we shall step into our own, on our own, with our own will, given half a chance, okay? I just finished a DVD on the Fae lectures that I did over the last year or so that Rachel knows about. She's always so supportive of my work. I can't tell you what a wonderful support she is to this kind of thing. It's just amazing. I'm so happy to be involved in this. But anyway, the DVD is out on the Fae lectures, and that leads me to work on this book called I'm Magician, which is the third book in a trilogy that started with Dangerous Imagination, Silent Assimilation. The second book is called The Workbooks. It's like a collection of resources. And then this, I'm Magician, is the third book. So we'll talk about those things that truly are magic that we don't think of, that are around us all the time, because, you know, we are surrounded by magic all the time, and we are the original magicians. So this is what we're going to start talking about. We're going to start talking about the fact that we as entities digest our landscape, that we live and die by eating significance. We take in 24,000 units of biophotonic energy every day. We kind of all know that now. That's been running around our community, and it's true. It's absolutely true. We transform it, though, such that other life forms on this planet are fed by it. We don't know that anymore. We are the makers of chi. We don't know that anymore. Okay, we have been taught to think that we need a cheeseburger or a tofu burger or something like that in order to nourish ourselves. We don't. That's not who we are. But we're completely disconnected from who we are physically and spiritually, okay? And that's what iMagician is about. We've been trapped in this vision of ourselves as a thinking pygmy, okay? Trapped in the monotony of everydayness. But in fact, we are the original magicians. The Fae are here at the turn of the tide, which is significantly much more connected to the eclipse that happened last August, which kind of was like a gauntlet thrown at us and gave us the option. We choose artificial intelligence or we choose the organic. And the Fae have been stepping up, not as a savior race. I don't believe in savior races. I think that's Draco programming. But to wake us up, to hand us back our own magic so that we can help. They're here to save the earth. They're here to save Sophia. And they're going to do that, by and large, by waking us up. So that's what iMagician is about.
So that's an absolute rabbit warren, isn't it, Cara, to start with? I'm like, which one of the 6 million questions could I go with there? I mean, are we being the magician, who the Fae are, the idea of magic, you know,
there's the show. I'll tell you all about it.
Well, I'd be interested to see what the other guys think. Steve, what do you make of some of that stuff? Is it in line with the type of research that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interesting that Cara talked about waking up in 2010. I mean, I've had 2 awakenings, and the second one was 2010. I think a lot of people are being pulled and awakened in this period, and are opening up to things like the Fae. I was very interested in the Fae for a long time. I trained in something called feminist anarchistic magic, and
wow,
and they were, which at the time was just a bit out there, but they were very interested in these races, and I did a lot of work with them. At first, it felt like being on a drug trip with no drugs, actually, when I was doing all these rituals connecting with these beings. But over the years, I've connected with a lot of different energies, beings, and so nothing kind of freaks me out anymore. Actually, I was quite warmed by what she was saying, actually. So, I mean, I had an awakening in 91. I don't know. So maybe I'm an older hand. I don't know really. But, and that threw me. I was married with 2 kids and living an ordinary life, you know, doing a corporate kind of existence. And then suddenly I started getting all this kind of pull to the spiritual side. And then, of course, my marriage wouldn't survive and the corporate job wouldn't survive. So I threw myself out there, and I decided eventually to follow it. And I just dived into so many things. I became a director of a company called Alternatives in London, which promoted all kinds of I think I organized about 1,300 events, you know, there. So I've heard hundreds, if not thousands, of authors speaking on stuff, and nothing really freaks me out anymore. I think our kind of vision of reality is expanding, because, you know, what we thought was reality and real is suddenly going, you know, being pulled apart. And I think our world is being pulled apart. Donald Trump will be a good example of one thing pulling our world apart, probably. But so the world is shifting and changing. My last awakening, 2010, was very difficult, and I was thrown into a dark night of the soul for 4.5 years, which was very difficult. So on the other side of that, I had no intention of teaching about star seeds, ascension, or anything like that. But on the other side, it felt like I had no choice. That was just the path I had to do. And again, you know, my second marriage collapsed, and a job that I loved, I had to resign from, and I was thrown on this very weird path. But over the time, I've kind of learned to just go with it and trust.
Yeah.
You know, there is a kind of higher intelligence that seems to know what it's doing with me, and even if it feels like really crazy, my kids think it's completely mad. Of course, you know, they go, Dad, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to no good. That's the best response I can give them, because I probably am up to no good in their eyes. And my ex-wife says to me these days, "What cult are you in?" You know, so. But I've kind of, you got to roll with it, you know, and yeah, totally. I loved everything what she was saying, and sacred sites, and crop circles every year. I'm there every year. Crop circles, Avebury, Glastonbury, 2 or 3 times a year. You know, I think there's a power in the land, a power in these Wiltshire is very powerful.
Absolutely.
I love the West Country. There's power in the earth. Our universe is expanding. Our minds are opening, and yeah, I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but we're already opening up.
Do you know, exactly, opening up the box. I mean, your work does talk about a monumental shift in consciousness, and the shift that's been building momentum for some decades. I know, Michael, you look into similar stuff, don't you, through ancient codes and stuff like this. Just tell us briefly about what your lecture is as well.
Yeah, mine is called The Ancient Code. My awakening actually happened in 2009, and there was a lot of strangeness in 2010 as well. So it's following a very, very similar theme. But I'd been a frontline police officer in both London and Birmingham for 17 years. And I became a multiple paranormal and UFO experiencer, which basically kicked me out of my structured job into a completely new world. In 2010, what I thought was a vacation to Egypt was a working holiday. And since that sort of year, I've been getting lots and lots of ancient codes and lots of information about the likes of the pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, ancient Sumeria, the Bible, where there's actually an underlying Bible code that not many people are actually picking up on. And I've been able to span this blueprint, this code that goes all across the ancient world, because the ancient world are all giving us the same information. They're all giving us the same sort of coded esoteric information, which is enlightened consciousness. And I've been able to find the true purpose of the pyramids, the true purpose of Stonehenge, the true purpose of all these beautiful monuments that everyone seems to be missing the pinnacle point. The pyramids of the Great Pyramid of Egypt is a replica of the endocrine system of the human brain. It is all about consciousness and enlightened consciousness. So all of these monuments, Stonehenge was all about harnessing Earth's Kundalini energy through the balanced body, through the chakra system. And they were using the Presley Blue Stones, which have 7 bands of energy that connect to the 7 chakras of the human body, which was purifying them and cleansing them. And this was harnessing Earth's Kundalini energy through the concentric circles, the primary halo, which was bringing them into Christ consciousness. And the likes of the Great Pyramid was doing the exact same thing. And when we look at the Bible, when it talks about Christ and Mary Magdalene and different biblical characters, that is really talking about the genetics of the human body. And I've been able to attribute every famous character of the Bible, every famous story of the Bible, and I've been able to attribute it to the workings of human genetics. So that really is my talk, how it all connects, and it's called The Ancient Code.
That's awesome, guys. I'm just going to give out your websites quickly. Michael, yours is michael-feeley.com.
That's correct.
That's right. Steve, yours is thesoulmatrix.com.
Mm-hmm.
Cara, yours is patreon.com/Cara St. Louis.
It is.
And Rachel, yours is the Multidimensional Show, which you can actually find on Eventbrite, can't you? And go and buy tickets from there.
Yes.
Guys, I want to come back to this because this is a question that burns in me and probably the reason why I do what I do. You all mentioned briefly the idea of being on a quest. Is that something you guys, you're certainly aware of it? Is it something that's avoidable, or is it something that whatever you try and do, and I can see Cara shaking her head because I agree. Is this something that regardless of how hard you try, you will be pulled back to? And why is that?
I think so. I think life experiences will just keep pushing you to, do what you're meant to be doing here. I know that from my own personal experience that, things will just happen, to just keep me on that track.
Do you know, my life carved in half when I tried to avoid it. I'm guessing you guys have probably had similar experiences. We all talk about awakenings. We all talk about being on that journey. Steve, how does that work out for you? Is it something that, like, say, your kids think you're mental? We know you're not much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the guy called Joseph Campbell. He researched a lot of kind of old myths, and he came up with this idea of the hero's journey, which was kind of every culture had this heroic template journey, which was the basis of it was there's a calling from somewhere or something internal, and usually the hero would refuse the calling. There's a lot of stories, you know, like Jonah and the whale being called and then refusing the journey. But eventually, and I think refusing the journey is normal. And certainly in my life, I've refused the journey. I've gone, you must be joking. You know, I'm not doing, I'm kind of resisted it. And I think resistance is part of the journey. Resistance can come through fear, anxiety, doubt, confusion, over-rationalization, or even your family saying you're crazy, or fear of money or anything like that. But it comes to a certain point where it's almost like you have no choice. But even though there is fear or anxiety, or we don't know what's going to happen, the pull is so strong, you've got to go through the doorway. And once you step through what Joseph calls the threshold, there's no turning back. So when I divorced my first wife, I was in California, and I had my wedding ring, and I threw it in a lake, and I knew there's no turning back. I can't get the ring back, you know, it's like I can't dive in and find it. So I knew that was the deciding moment that I was leaving the marriage and moving forward. So we move forward, and what Joseph says is that there's all kinds of resistances in terms of dragons or witches that come up, but they're all reflections of our own doubts, insecurities, fears, whatever. And then there is supernatural help in the forms of gods, goddesses, you know, Hermes or Athena comes along. And then there's this goal at the end, this kind of goal, this golden fleece type of thing. But the journey doesn't end there. Whatever the attainment is, you know, like I felt I'd arrived at alternatives or written some books, I've arrived. But the journey then is to take the gift back to share it with the community. So the journey is always, it seems to be about ourselves, but eventually it's always about sharing it with other people. So now my family, even though my kids think I'm slightly crazy, they all realize they've been on a journey, and I've become a huge resource for them. I've helped both of them in many, many ways that they go, Dad, you know, that's amazing. And they kind of realize it's down to my journey, because if I was an embittered corporate guy, you know, now 60-year-old guy, you know, with a freedom pass, what would I have to offer them? I'd have to offer them my bitterness or my kind of disappointments or my frustrations. But having done the journey, done a journey, and now there's another one coming. What I can offer them is all my experiences, my, you know, what I've learned on the way. And my grandkids absolutely adore me. I've got 2 grandkids, and one of them said to me the other day, Granddad, I want to be an author like you. And nobody in my family has ever said anything like that. And can you design me a book cover? Which I helped to design this book cover. So, you know, I'm out of the box, and in a way I become a resource for people behind me. And you know, it's all about service as well, what we're doing. We have the journey, but that journey helps other people. You know, I'm got clients coming out my ears these days. When I first started this, I thought, who's going to be interested in any of this? But now, you know, I'm packed solid with people wanting me. And so now I'm a resource for other people. I've lived my life in the last, 25 years on the spiritual journey. Or was it 25 years or so? And then that experience, like everyone else on the show, we can offer it back to our family and anybody else in need. And the internet allows us to reach literally thousands of people. I mean, I've got 13,500 followers in my YouTube channel.
Wow.
And that was all in 1 year. I've been building that in 1 year. That seems to be going mental. So all of us can really take our experience collective. All of us have got different experiences, different gifts to share. And those gifts aren't just for ourselves or our family, they're for the world, really. So the journey is really going to, I think, because we've gone on the journey and we're still on the journey, that's going to reach literally, I think, thousands of people probably.
Joseph Campbell once said, we must be willing to get rid of the life we've planned so as to have the life that's waiting for us. Cara, I can see you're going to jump in.
Right. No, I was going to jump in because I was going to say that's exactly the person I was going to bring up, Steve, was Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey and the, you know, the absolute, this is by refusing the journey, we become ill, we have midlife crises, we become, I mean, it's the most boring thing in the world to come here and not pick up your sword and go forward with it. And Joseph Campbell talked about that extensively. And it's a beautiful reality. I was going to say metaphor, allegory, but it's not really. It's an actuality. And the thing is, people, all of us, and this is something I talk quite openly about anymore, we are all going through constant initiations on this planet from the minute we're born. All of us here, maybe we've been through some pretty brutal ones because we're trying to get to a specific role that's far outside the boundaries of normal society. You know what I mean? But we keep getting kicked into the next. And one of the themes that you've just heard, none of us have been able to stay in our ordinary jobs. My kids do think I'm a little crazy, but I'm a Steiner teacher, and I was a Steiner teacher for decades. So their parameters are already pushed pretty wide. You know what I mean? But I do know, sometimes they say, Mom, tell me about this, but not your version, okay? The version, and I can't do that. So, but it's all something about, there's something about this idea of initiation, constant initiation. And I have come at the tail end of from 2010 to 2018 now to understand that I was born to do this, that I actually did go from the point where my mother, that tragic incident, to now exactly the way I was supposed to go through it, as painful and brutal as it may have been. And now I know that this is actually what I came here to do. So, I mean, I talk about that a bit briefly in my talk. There's just so much I think all of us probably just have so much to convey during our periods of time when we're speaking to people. So
why the hero's journey? Why the difficulties? Why the trauma?
Well, you got to wake up. Okay. You got to wake up. And it's all about, when you get slapped around, that's when you get into a new level of, it's all about breaking all of that open. Because what happens when we come here is we are coated in this mesh, this sheath of not fantasy, but it's really the matrix. It is so well constructed. It is so well constructed that it takes some serious jarring to move us out of that and into a different understanding, and to keep us in a different understanding. Okay. I mean, these are mystery schools have been around forever, and that's generally, you recapitulate as you go through your life. Maybe you recapitulate all the times that you've spent in mystery schools. That's very common for people. And then you have your own initiations in this lifetime to make sure you get where you're supposed to be. It's not an easy task. It's not a comfortable task. It can't be comfortable. If your life is all noodle salad, I don't think you're on the path you're supposed to be on.
I think you're probably right in many respects, Cara. I think that I guess it's about preparation, isn't it? It's about preparation for who we're to become, where we're to go as a race. Micheal, what is the future that's laid out for us, and what does your work show us in regards to this? Because you talk a lot, don't you, about ancient codes and where these codes come from. Where do they come from?
Well, this awakening for me was completely unavoidable. In 2009, or just prior to 2009, myself and my wife was approached by a spirit girl from Victorian England who'd been murdered in the year 1850, and she wanted us to investigate her death. It turned out that her assailant was a stepfather. It was also with myself and my wife as well, and he'd been smashing windows in the house, and there's all kinds of negative activity. So I was actually thrown in at the deep end and actually relived this young girl's last moments of life, sort of on the 159th anniversary of her death. So for me, it was completely unavoidable. And since that time, it was that incubation period of about seven or 8 years, just like Cara was mentioning, where there was lots and lots of, where I'd seen dimensional gateways open up in front of me, where I'd see UFOs in the sky both day and night. I'd be visited by Egyptian pharaohs, literally in complete headdress. So a lot of this information, there is an aristocracy in this world that will try anything to keep humanity at a low vibrational ebb, and will try and keep it down under any circumstances, through food, through water, through the air, through everything that enters our body. And if they know, they understand harmonics, they understand how the human body is activated by certain frequencies. And if they can keep those frequencies at a level that they choose, by the reharmonization of music, for argument's sake, they can keep us at a low vibrational ebb so that we'll never reconnect to our Christ consciousness. And the whole world is situated and structured under this, as Cara says, this matrix system, which is absolute genius. The way in which they have control the population, the minds of the population and the activities of the population is nothing less than genius. A lot of this comes from, yes, the ancient mystery schools and a lot of the Gnostic teachings, which goes on the principle that only the eyes that can see and the ears that can hear will come into this type of knowledge, because many of the ancients saw this kind of knowledge as a privilege, not a right. And there is a group of people, shall we say, like the ancient Pharisees and things like that, that deliberately kept this sacred information about ourselves to themselves, because they wanted to have the advantage over everybody else by sacred knowledge. And what we have as a substitution to that is biblical scriptures. We have a celebrity culture. We have an advertisement world. We have all these distractions that are basically diverting us away from the highway of truth, and they are diverting us the long way all around these towns and cities. They try everything they can possibly can to keep us away from this knowledge. And part of my journey here is to basically the re-emergence of this sacred ancient knowledge, which tells people how to basically ascend to their Christ consciousness, to connect their inner consciousness to the outer consciousness, which is symbolic of the crossing of the Red Sea, of the Moses story of the Bible. We are basically making that transit, the easy crossing from the left to the right hemisphere of the brain. And all of these biblical characters and all of these ancient cultures, the Egyptians, everyone else, understood about harmonics. They understood about genetics. They understood about universal harmonics. They understood how to transition or transcend from this physical realm to what they called the other world. And this is what the establishment are trying at all costs to prevent people from ever knowing. So my journey here is to cause the re-emergence of this sacred knowledge that has been hidden from us for thousands of years.
Guys, just quickly then, and I want to come to you as well, Cara. Who or what are the Fae? I guess we've been led to believe that, or I guess there are spiritual out there, people out there who believe that there is a time where spirits lived on this planet with us, that they worked with us perhaps, or worked against us. Is that in anywhere close? Who or what are the Fae, and where do they factor into this?
It's not what you think it is. Let me put it that way. And it probably is where I will diverge from my fellows here, but listening to them, they're so, it's going to be a fun event. It's going to be a great event with lots of great input from everybody. But what I've come to discover is that the Fae are our original seed race. The Fae are our original seed race. So the first one's here after Source. Okay, they're, for example, the entity that was responsible for generating and laying the ley line grids, because they are still here with us. They have wedded themselves to the earth in ways that we no longer understand. That's basically what the Fae is. Now, I've spent a lot of time, I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years making a trail from A to Z. I have a Fae lecture that I do, and it's just become a 2-hour DVD to take you from point A to point Z. But essentially, they are our original seed race. My view, and I feel that I have the evidence for it, is that they originated from what we might now call Ireland, although I think we have to be careful when we assume that the things we think of as something right now may not 300 million years ago have been what it was. But they are a race of what we might call gods and goddesses. It was definitely, as Steve might agree, a maternal feminine gesture, okay? And that is traceable through the ages up until today. It was adopted and corrupted by the Catholic Church. Anyway, so the Fae, this is a huge subject. What are the Fae? Marie Wheatley started me on that path by asking me if I could help do some research on the origins of the Celtic hearth. So anyway, that's, I mean, that's as far as I can really go into it without taking about 2 more hours of your time. But it will be an integral part of what I bring in I Am Magician, because it's foundational.
So I want to ask you now then, guys, is what Cara's talking about, the Fae, is that part of, and I guess both Steve and Michael, for you, this one, is that part of what's being used to keep us away from our spiritual enlightenment, if you will, if the right kind of vibration? I struggle to make that point, actually, because that didn't really make a lot of sense. Is this part and parcel, is this all entwined into it, I guess? You know, that banishment, if you want to call it that, of the Fae, or the fact that we now don't understand it, is that a result of people trying to shut us down in some way from our natural course?
As far as I'm concerned, that the whole world has been structured to shut humanity down from its origins, from its source, from its seed, from everything it can possibly shut us down from, and everything has been completely replaced by an artificial reality of their choosing. So yes, they will basically shut us all down. And I too have connection to the Celts, because I'm a descendant of Irish Celtic kings, so I do have that kind of connection as well to Ireland and things. But the whole of this world is a fake reality, completely structured to shut down humanity from its original origins.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. What can I say? I'd say that we've been living in, I agree, we've been living in a highly controlled reality. I kind of take the view that what a number of spiritual teachers take the view also, that rather than we're the kind of victims of something, I think at some level there's been a collective decision to explore what people call a separation consciousness. Explore, it sounds crazy, but 3D as it is now, which is a matrix of kind of fear, separation consciousness, deceit, lies, manipulation. We're experiencing almost like growth through opposition. It's very hard to grow here. You know, if you want to learn about courage, you have to go on the battlefield almost here. It's not an easy place to be. It's a kind of tough school of hard knocks, but I think this school has been in operation ever since the fall of Atlantis, which I believe happened some 13,000 years ago. I mean, there are many old civilizations, and Egypt, I think, has also been strong connections to that culture of Atlantis. And there are lots of myths around the world of this kind of flood myths in many cultures around the world. There's some disaster that happened a long time ago. So since that time, I think we've been living in this increasingly low vibration, which people can be controlled in a low vibration. In a low vibration, it's very hard for the light to come in. So an example of that would be if you take Jesus Christ coming into this reality and preaching in a very difficult place, you know, like Palestine. The forces that be do not want to hear that kind of stuff and want to get rid of those kind of people. You know, maybe the Buddha had an easier time in India. India was a bit more of a spiritual culture, perhaps, but traditionally spiritual messengers have had hard times in this place. And even nowadays, I think the forces that be, that most of the speakers have alluded to, are very aware of what's going on in this shift. I think they're aware of it. They're not stupid. And I think 9/11 was probably an attempt not only to kind of grab resources and strategic lands and oil and all that kind of stuff, but I think 9/11 was an attempt to keep the planet in a low frequency, because war is one of the best ways you can keep a planet in low frequency. So 9/11, when I remember walking down Stoke Newington, you may not know, but London, Stoke Newington, a street in Stoke Newington in London, and feeling the shock in my body and feeling something has happened. It's a bit like, you know, Yoda going, there's a tremor in the force type of thing. And I kind of wondered what's happened. And this was 2 hours before, I think, the planes, or some hours before the planes hit. I remember feeling this. And then when the planes hit, I remember looking at that, and afterwards the story that rolled out. And that was it was a big wake up. And I think 9/11 is a wake up for a lot of people, because I looked at that, and this was my first thing of conspiracy theory. I looked at it and said, that is not what happened. And I think actually 9/11 was a big wake up call. And in this plane, this 3D world, actually the dark side, I call, you know, the dark force, are actually working to wake up people as much as the light, I think. You know, you get 9/11 and you get kind of Donald Trumps and all these kind of characters reeling out, and you look at them, and increasingly the world is looking for people who are on a spiritual path, increasingly crazy or insane. You know, I think John Lennon said that the world is run by insane people. And when I heard him say that, I couldn't quite get it way back. Was it in the 70s, or I can't remember when he said it.
I think
But
you might be
now I
right.
totally get it. You know, I totally understand what you're saying. But the light is increasing on the planet, and I think the dark are worried because they're being cleared out. And you can see in America and London and England as well, the paedophilia rings that are coming out now, which before were all hidden. There's a lot of stuff that they can't hide anymore because the vibration is increasing, and everything's vibrational. So if the vibration of the planet increases, things which were really dark, you can't hide very much anymore. So that's the good news. And I think the dark side are very well aware of it, which is why there's a lot of increase in attacks in the inner planes, like psychic attack going on, lots of it going on. And also this kind of, America's really driving endless war at them. Britain just following them like some kind of poodle dog, you know. And it's not the American people, but the powers that be, which were centered very much in the British Empire, kind of flipped over to America when they realized the power had been shifted, you know, across the pond, so to speak. So, but these guys, they're all part of the game of growth. This planet is, I don't believe it's going to be a dark planet for much longer. The dark are being cleared out. We've had more light. We've got more light teachers on the planet now than ever before. This conversation we're having now would never happen 20 years ago.
Very true.
I don't believe, you know, we'd be the nutters in the, you know, the side alley, wouldn't we?
That's why we called the Asylum, Steve. No, there's a good point to this, and it is about this duality, because I often say this when we were talking about the show. Are we in the Asylum because we are to be kept safe from the madness of the outside world? Or are we in the Asylum because we need to be, or the outside world needs to be protected from us? Who is mad nowadays is the question, isn't it? And you struck a great point there, Steve, as well, when you were talking about the balance to the force. Is this ascension process inevitable? Will the planet go to these places? Will we as a spirit, as a race, go to these places? No matter how hard the dark tries to change, is it ultimately inevitable that these things will happen, or that, if you will, a balance to the force will happen?
I'd say so. I think certainly when I was going through my dark night of the soul between 2010 and 15, I actually believed that the world was going, you know, was actually heading for the dark. Everything looked really dark to me. But on the other side of it, and I came out, I realized I just had a kind of an initiation with the dark side, you could say. And now I think what happened is, leading up to that 2012 point was I think that was a decision point. We had to decide as a race, are we going to keep following this 3D path, which ultimately does lead to Armageddon? You know, all the kind of prophecies kind of pointed to a really, really tough Armageddon type reality. I think now we've chosen something different, and I think what's happening now is slow, uncomfortable change towards the light, and I think it's inevitable. I don't think the dark can do anything about it. They're going to try every which way they can, and believe me, they've tried to kind of create war on a number. I think Ukraine was they tried really pushing for war, and NATO, you know, I'm British over here, but I don't think we're the good guys, actually. I think we were pushing for war there, and I think we're pushing for war in Syria as well. And actually Putin has been very strangely kind of of course you've got to put him in context of Russia and the whole history of Russia, but I think actually he saved Syria from a fate of Libya and Iraq. So I think actually what he's done is actually pretty good, stopping Western forces from overrunning Syria and actually ripping it to pieces, which is what they were trying to do. You know, the media is highly controlled, and we get all these stories about, you know, Assad is the evil guy, but those stories are highly manipulated. And if you get journalists on the ground, there are very few journalists on the ground in Syria, but the one or two that have come out, they've all said what the Western media is saying is complete nonsense. It's not true. Actually, we're as much to blame, if not more, than those governments. So I think they're trying really hard to push for war. I think actually Trump was a complete surprise for the dark side, the deep state. I don't think they actually wanted him. I think they wanted Clinton, but they've got him, and now they're really trying to manipulate him as far as they can. And he is an egomaniac, but he's kind of a wild, you know, a wild card, isn't he? But it's a good sign actually for the planet, because the deep state are not controlling as they once did, you know. And I think Obama, for all his good rhetoric and all the way that people loved him, was not. He was part of the game as well. Personally, that's what I feel.
I agree.
I remember seeing him before he was getting elected with Michelle Obama, and I looked at him and I thought, he looks far too confident. He knows something. You know, I think he went into that, you know, a black president. He looked very, very confident. And I thought something's not quite right about this. Something's being manipulated. And you know, America's where the power base is. So a lot of the manipulation is going over there as well. A lot of the Illuminati, I believe, are in England, sitting nicely in their Surrey estate homes, you know, but the real power is being moved through America on the world stage. But I think their game's up. And I think it's dark at the moment. It's the darkest before the dawn, and the dark are trying their utmost in every which way they can to grab control, but they're losing it. I think actually it's going to take another 15 years to completely clear them out. By 2030, I reckon we'll be in a completely different paradigm. At the moment, it looks like, you know, the world's nuts, but personally, I feel it's all right. There's a lot of souls on the planet that will go away and follow some 3D timeline somewhere else, where they're not done with war. There's a lot of people on the planet who still want to grow through war and, you know, all that stuff, and let them do it wherever they want to go, you know.
Guys, just quickly, about a minute or so before the break, Micheal, Cara, and Rachel, what are your thoughts on that, just quickly?
Okay, I can say, the one thing I do want to interject, based on what he was saying, I certainly agree with his evaluations of the political characters that are coming and going right now. That's absolutely spot on. But as an American living in London for the last 5 years, I really just want us to start using, I want us to start realizing that it is the City of London, Washington, D.C., and the Vatican that are the power centers, okay? We can't just say the British, we can't just say the Americans, we can't just say this, we can't, because we're all hostages to a large extent of these three power centers. Okay.
Are they beyond nations now, Cara?
Yes, of course they are. They are absolutely. They always have been.
Micheal,
they've always been extraterritorial. Yeah.
Micheal, how does that fit in with what you do?
It fits in perfectly. There is a global agenda of politics going on, and that is basically a one world system, or what some people call the New World Order, which is the centralized with a capital in Jerusalem, a world capital of Jerusalem. So it's no coincidence that Donald Trump is giving Jerusalem to Israel, etc., because the strings of global politics have an agenda. And as President Roosevelt once said, presidents are selected and not elected. The global politics is nothing in global politics is by mistake. And the reason we're attacking all these sovereign countries like Syria, etc., it is because they come under the remit of Greater Israel. And Greater Israel is the Zionist global agenda. That's the reason we're really, really attacking these. And 9/11 was the pinnacle change. And if you look at the Millennium Hotel in New York, which is by the World Trade Center, it was actually built or symbolized upon the monolith in the film Space Odyssey 2001. Every time that black monolith appeared, there was a change in the humanity, in the consciousness of humanity. According to them, 9/11 was the change. It was the home straight to their new world order, and global politics is by no mistake.
Wow, guys, that's a brilliant place to leave it, of course, as well. We'll pick it up in a few seconds here on the Asylum. Thanks for that, guys. A fascinating first hour as well, I might add.
Thanks. It was.
Yeah.
Wicked. Join us again on the Asylum then in a few minutes for more interesting conversation like that. I'm really enjoying this, guys. Thank you very much. Asylum. Welcome back then to the Asylum. It's me, Gunnar, in the chair of destiny. Joined this week by the Multidimensional Show. We've got Cara St. Louis on the phone. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello. Micheal Feeley as well.
Good evening.
And of course, Steve Nobel, is it?
Hi, everyone.
Good evening, Steve. Guys, Cara, you were just talking then about a little bit about Rudolf Steiner, which I want to ask about. And more importantly, I just want to come back to the British values you were talking about there in the break. I believe it's queuing and cake, isn't it?
I don't know.
They're British values.
Okay, well, I can certainly say some things in general, because this particular cosmology, I would call Rudolf Steiner I mean, we evolve, okay? And we park our car or our horse, we pull our horse up to different places along the way. the most important spiritual guide I had was Joseph Campbell. I call him my spiritual grandfather. From there, I moved to Rudolf Steiner because I was interested in children. I'm all about children. It's why I do what I do. And I wanted to become what we call a Waldorf teacher in the United States.
Right.
That means something. It only means that you need a foundation in this particular cosmology, because it is absolutely forbidden to bring that into the schools, and we never do that. Okay. However, this is all built on the work of the philosopher Rudolf Steiner. Okay, who was an amazing person. Now, as I go forward, I have my own thing, number one. Number two, I kind of find myself walking a path between Steiner and Gurdjieff. They both had, they both had things to say, you know what I mean? They're both right, they're both not right, that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, one of the things that I've done with my life is work as a Steiner teacher, or what we call a Waldorf teacher in the United States. And the reason I've done that is primarily because it keeps the right and left hemispheres talking to each other. Them being separated is not a natural thing. That is an artificial thing. They're supposed to be talking to each other. Everything comes through the arts. Very important, because we are storytellers. It's what we are. It's who we are. It's how we conjure. We conjure verbally. We conjure through frequency. We conjure through tone. Yeah. So we are storytellers, and it protects that. It's meant to protect the childhood for the child. Okay. But what I said was, having come to the United Kingdom, I know that in 2004, the Steiner schools struck a deal with the British government because they needed an infusion. They needed stipends for people to be able to send their children to kindergarten. And when you do that, you make yourself liable to organizations like Ofsted, which is the government policing body of schools, of education in this country. And when you do that, you are at risk. You are at serious risk of losing your sovereignty. The teacher runs schools making decisions for themselves and their children in their classroom. And frankly, one of the things that I was most proud of, in particular with this pedagogy, is that we taught history from zero to now. In my country, in the United States, I don't know about here, but in the United States, children are given American history over and over and over and over, and that's our idea of history, which is also known as brainwashing. Okay. But we go from zero to, we follow the epochs, and we say that allows the children to incarnate properly, because everything is a recapitulation. You know, we come in, we recapitulate things until we get to the now. It's really important. It's really difficult to do that as a teacher. I have to produce a lesson plan that proves that every single thing I do pushes British values.
I think we, as an American sitting amongst a group of English or British people, we're struggling to work out what those values are as well.
Hey, you know.
But I mean, it's an interesting point, Cara, because when we talk about values, I mean, not just British values, but values as a whole, as a planet. I guess our values are much different than any one individual nation, aren't they? And surely those are much more important as well.
Yeah, well, you know, you can't have freedom and a straitjacket living in the same space. You can't. It doesn't work that way.
Steve, you touched on it just before the break, and you were talking about this balance between light and dark. How are we going to move? And you mentioned, say, 2030 as a time frame. How do we move to that time frame and get everybody emotionally, spiritually, and physically where they need to be?
Well, what I imagine is going to happen is, I think on the planet, less than 1% of people are probably interested in what we're talking about or really awakened to this conversation. About 1%. I may be wrong. But those people are the kind of pioneers who are pioneering, leading the way. I think most people on the planet are too busy, too much in stress or survival to give any time or attention to this kind of material, or they might think it's crazy. But what will wake them up, I think, is revelations, And the idea, when the curtain is pulled and they realize that the world is not what they thought it was, when the kind of facade drops, you know, the Wizard of Oz, the wizard behind the curtain, the little Toto pulls the curtain back. You remember that scene in Wizard of Oz? I think people are starting to see this, because, and it's already having an effect now. WikiLeaks, for example, whistleblower. Oh, no, it was after 2012 that whistleblowers started coming forward. Edward Snowden revealed what the American government and the British governments were up to in mass spying, and it was denied. And then suddenly everyone was totally shocked by it. Chelsea Manning gave that video of the American helicopter machine gunning those civilians in, where was it? I think it was Iraq, wasn't it? I think
it was Iraq, yeah.
Iraq. And again, totally shocking. But still, even though it's totally shocking, most people are still not aware of it. I remember being at one family gathering, talking to my brother. He was very well read, you know, he's had a master's in international affairs. And I asked him about, have you heard of this? And he said, he wanted me to show it to him on YouTube. And he said, how do you know it's true? And so most people still haven't heard about this. It's still it's still got to get out there. Social media is getting the message out there. But of course, social media, Facebook is highly controlled, and they control a lot of what goes out there, and they kind of deleting, you know, fake news sites, which are actually what they don't agree with. So there is a lot of control, but I think eventually it's unstoppable. More and more there'll be revelations that come out. It's very hard to kind of sit on all these sources, as more and more people are willing to come forward and blow the whistle on what's going on and reveal stuff. It's harder for the government. How can you control all of it? You can't control all of it. So I think people are going to wake up through revelation, but there's a growing band of spiritual people on the planet. I think these beings who I call star seeds, which are, for me, a star seed is someone who hasn't been locked in the reincarnational cycle of this planet for like thousands of lifetimes or a long, long time. They come from a very different reincarnational history. So they come here and they look at the planet and they go, it's crazy. Star seeds are very sensitive types. They have a different intelligence, for example. There are a lot of new star seeds coming in now. And I think what's going to happen is more and more the rate of star seeds coming in the planet, which is about 1% now, is increasing dramatically after 2012, 2030. I think it'll go up again. So if you imagine, if you like, you get a whole planet who've got a consciousness of Nelson Mandela type thing. Imagine the leadership, how that shifts. Because at the moment, if you look at the leadership, it's not just adolescent, but mental adolescence mostly, you know, neurotic, psychotic adolescents, some of them, they've got the gift of the gab, you know, making decisions, which is absolutely crazy. So as there's a shift in consciousness, of course, that leadership can't sustain what they're doing. They can only do it because most of the population at the moment is dumbed down, controlled, switched off. But that switching off is being reversed now. A lot of people waking up. And of course, government don't mind people smoking or drinking loads of alcohol, but they don't like things like LSD, which wake people up or potentially can wake people up, or magic mushrooms. So they're very anti-waking up agents, and they're very good at anything that puts you to sleep, like pharmaceutical companies. Let's make a load of money, you know, let's drug people. And, you know, I think I saw a report the other day that some study said, let's give people more drugs because they're even better than we thought. You know, for depression.
Yeah, the BBC just came out with that, right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Antidepressants are safe, and so many more people should be on them.
Exactly that. How mad is that?
Yeah.
No, that was a thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
so they're
goodness.
trying to dumb down the population, but all these antics won't work in the end. It's not an easy. No one said it's going to be easy doing this waking up thing here, because it's a hard place, but it's going to happen. And you know, I think everything's moving forward at a very, very fast pace. People are waking up left, right, and center. 2 years ago, I might have a client a week. Now I'm getting them like 4 or 5 a day. They're coming out. The people are waking up because the world, the kind of pressures of living is also waking people up. And the soul itself is kind of impulsing lots of people. Wake up now. You know, Morpheus is handing the red and the blue pill out like crazy. You know?
Like crazy. Do you know, Steve, as you were saying it there, it reminds me of a story I was reading just a while back about not having antidepressants. I think it is in China or something. Is this the story of the cow? Have you heard this? So they had this guy who'd stood on a landmine, and he'd lost both of his legs. He now couldn't work. He was suffering. He was in pain. And they said, what you need to do is you need to give him antidepressants. You know, you can use all these great pharmaceuticals and it can really help people. And he says, well, we've got antidepressants. He said, we just gave him a cow. He says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, we gave him a cow and he found purpose and he found reason to continue. He found he could do other things, you know, and that was the way he solved his mental health issue. Is there a massive issue, guys, in the Western world, in the modern world, for this insanity towards dumbing ourselves down or medicating ourselves so we can't feel anymore? And is that part and parcel of the process of the control that they're now losing?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of research on the endocannabinoid system right now. I am making it my job to know all about that right now, because that's one of the things that they've hidden from us. Okay, this is there's an endocannabinoid receptor in every cell of your body. Many of them are collected in your brain and in your gut. Okay, and we used to have this substance in our body all the time. It is one of the best soil remediators it's the best soil remediator on the planet. It doesn't get talked about in the UK. I just did a couple of shows about this and how I just don't hear this talked about in Britain, and that's fine. It's being hashed out in the States. It's being hashed out in Oceania. It's coming to Canada. We're going head to head with the pharmaceutical companies and Monsanto and George Soros in this arena, of course, and how all of those things get put together. But the reality is we used to have this in our bodies because animals free ranged on this stuff because it covered the planet. Okay, so this is one of the things that's being kept from us. It's not a drug. It's not medicinal. It's a nutrient. It's a nutrient that we need. And it is an amazing antidepressant. Okay, that's just one of the ways they keep us nuts. That's one of the ways they keep us so unhappy. And there are so many entities internally and externally, okay, that are feeding on our fear, our adrenaline, our unhappiness, our negative emotions. Okay, so you know, it's like these guys were saying, it's like Michael was saying, it's brilliant. It's freaking brilliant what they put together. It's seamless. It's absolutely seamless. All right. The people responsible for removing the endocannabinoid system from our knowledge base were the Rockefellers who were responsible for the modern medical systems that we have in place now, specifically the pharmacology that we have in place now, with these dangerous drugs that they are feeding to our children, injecting into our bodies. This takes me back to sitting in a health and safety meeting when I was still teaching and hearing the gasps from my colleagues that in fact in the United States, before a child is an adult, they receive 72 injections now.
What?
72. And my colleagues, it's the gasp is like, because yes, they are really after us in the States. This is what they're doing to us. 72 injections, gang.
That's incredible. What's the Michael? Just in terms of your work, then, how do we fight back against this, and what is the overall, I guess, objective really for us as humans?
Well, firstly, pharmacy comes from Pharmacia, who was a water nymph that lived in the River of Poison. So there's no coincidence there. And it's also no coincidence that the newspapers of London and the UK are all situated in Fleet Street. And Fleet means under the same control, under the same ownership. Again, no coincidence. What the Wizard of Oz taught us, because there's many hidden meanings in the Wizard of Oz as well. And Toto, the dog, Toto comes from total, means to join together, complete. And when we join together and we are complete, when we are total, Toto, we can reveal what's behind the curtain. We need to unify. What we need to do most of all is to educate ourselves and actually reprogram ourselves to what's really going on, because people's reality are forged by getting up from work, putting their phone down for 2 seconds, watching BBC News, being given a script that's been prepared by people in the corridors of power who want to give us a reality that they want us to see. The most pinnacle thing that we can do to save ourselves is to educate ourselves and actually see an alternative reality. That for me is the origin, the basis of what we must do. We must start questioning, and must stop believing what the mainstream are telling us. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to start looking at alternative realities, because there is always double speak in politics. There is always a underlying theme in the news. When we're told of a certain nasty dictator, you know, the biggest dictators are in the Western governments, not in the Middle East, and people are drip fed this reality that is scripted for them. So the most pinnacle thing we need to do is re-educate ourselves and actually start looking into things. Put down our phone, switch off the mainstream news, and actually start looking into things. And that is why social media is under such attack at the moment, under various guises. We have children who live just a few miles away from me who have to give fingerprints and palm prints to get school meals. We have my local council operate drones in the sky that are monitoring people. Unless we start looking at what's really, really going on, we are very, very in danger of becoming completely controlled and in prison. And as Steve was saying, I do think there's an inevitability that the light will come through. It has to come through because there is a plan for it to come through. But we are going to have a rough ride if we don't start waking ourselves up.
Michael, just coming back, I mean, you were a police officer, weren't you? Have you existed on both sides of this barrier? Have you seen it from both sides, maybe?
I've certainly seen it from, I was a police officer for 17 years. So I've seen it from inside the system, and I now see it from outside of the system. And having both of those parallel is quite an advantage, because the everything is a microcosm of a macrocosm. So what's happening in the police service, what's happening in the NHS, what's happening in the fire brigade, what's happening in all these institutions of ours is what's happening at government level, which is then what's happening at the corridors of power level, which is then what's happening at national level, and then global level. All of these things are micro, macro, and all of these systems are being amalgamated. You know, I see probably about 10 or 15 years ago, I said that the police forces of this country will become one. It's part of a centralised world, a centralised army, a centralised religion, a centralised government. The police force are being amalgamated into one centralised force, and that will happen. These crime and police commissioners, the only reason they are there is so they can drift out chief constables, because then your crime and police commissioners will be business leaders, and your crime will only be investigated on cost effectiveness. All of this is a political plan, and I was sort of spotted this 10, 15 years ago when I was still in there. So all of these establishments, manipulating crime figures to fool the public, manipulating response time figures to fool the public, manipulating stop and search and counter to fool the public. All of these statistics are to fool the public. It is a gigantic fraud, and it depends on the size, depends on the level of the institution, depending upon the size of that fraud. Everything in politics is preordained, and we really, really do need to start looking what is behind that curtain.
Boom. There you go. Guys, thoughts on that?
Well, I can't. How can you argue with that?
Exactly.
You just can't. It's right there. You know, there's so many things. However, I must say there is a handful of foundational stuff that you can't argue with, and yet people either ignore it or they do. So, you know.
Interesting. Guys, how then are we heading towards an impasse? Are we heading towards a grave set of events, let's say, in our future, or is the future bright? Is it inevitable, as Steve was saying earlier, that we are going to get to this place of light and love?
Of course, it's inevitable. We are more powerful than anything they could possibly. Why do you think they have to spend all their time, resources, money? Why do you think it is so hard for them to keep us in our boxes? Because we are always leaking out. They cannot contain us. They can't contain us. That is why everything, every waking moment and every resource they have is spent on generating ways to keep us contained. But we will not be contained. We will not.
Is this then, guys, the last throw of the dice for them? I mean, we're talking about waking up. It's so bizarre. When I started the radio show, my mum used to think I was crazy. Now she comes to me and she goes, yeah, Edward Snowden, you know, or my government says this, or my government. I mean, as you said before, Steve, everybody's kind of waking up now, aren't they?
Well, I think a lot of people are waking up. Maybe I feel in our circles, people are waking up. I do think that the mass population are being shaken, but I'm not sure if they're waking up yet. They need a bit more of a shake. I'm not quite sure exactly what kind of events will wake up the general population. It may be a series of events like the in England, it was the Jimmy Savile was quite shocking. In
Yeah.
America, you had the Weinstein, which again created this wave of women coming forward. And these kind of revelations can be very shocking and need to come out. I think the potential revelations which could come out, if they're allowed to come out. I know there was a thing about Westminster with a kind of child ring and even the accusations of murder and all kinds of stuff. And but it kind of got shoved to one side. They kind of sat on it really. But I've had, I didn't really believe some of the stuff I'd heard about, you know, satanic this or that. But I have had clients who have told me in no uncertain terms what goes behind closed doors and what they witnessed. And I can't repeat it, but I was totally shocked that actually the stuff like this actually does go on. And those people are, you know, one or two of those clients are now not in this country. They've run away because they're afraid for their lives, basically. And thinking about kind of coming out and writing about it, but then deciding, you know, maybe not. So, but I've heard this stuff and I know it goes on. But if the general public heard what goes on, there'll be a revolution. And I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was a president. Someone in America said, if the general public know what actually happens, there'll be a revolution tomorrow.
Ford, wasn't it? I think.
Was it Ford?
No, it was Bush. It was Bush. George Bush Sr. said, if the American people ever figure out what we've done to them,
yeah,
there'll be rioting in the streets and we'll be hanging from ropes or something like that. It was George Bush Sr.
Yeah, and Rockefeller wrote his biography saying stuff as well about, you know, all kinds of stuff, and it's written in plain view. But because it's so in plain view, people don't, they kind of can't see it. It's quite strange. I remember George W. Bush's advisor, was it Gove? Gove, I think his name was, wrote a book.
Yeah, Karl Rove. And he wrote this book. And in the book, he said, this is before 9/11, he said, for America to retain control of the Middle East and energy and maintain an economic future, we need a second Pearl Harbor.
This is Project for a New American Century.
I don't know.
PNAC was, I believe, was like a sort of neoconservative movement, wasn't it? That they actually released this about 6 months before 9/11 actually happened. And I think the quote in it is something on the lines of, like you say, in order to have this global police force, this one world government and this one world army, that they need a cataclysmic or catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And less than 6 months later, we have the Twin Towers.
But you also have to remember, gang, this is black magic. We're surrounded by black magic. I mean, we're surrounded by magic all the time. Magic is what there is. This is what we've been told doesn't exist. This is black magic. This is blood sacrifice. This is adrenaline. This is energy. This is black. I mean, war. This is nothing but, you know, this is not only this is people who are so filled with adrenaline and then bloodletting onto the earth. Let's never, ever, ever, ever forget that this is sorcery. This is black magic we're talking about here. Okay. That's what it is. And in order for the magic to work, they have to tell you what they're doing. It's a rule of magic. Okay. That's why they tell you this stuff. They have to, or it won't work.
Now, I want to make a point about that, actually, Cara, and it's quite interesting that you just raised that, because I said this to my mum, and you mentioned there, Steve, about the Westminster paedophile rings, you know, the stuff that's happened in America, Jimmy Savile. One of the things that I did think about this was that I think they're going to throw, over the next 6 to 10 years, a lot of people to the lions, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen this exactly within the UK. You know, we can have this big #MeToo about what Weinstein, but what we're not really dealing with is a real insidious, scary and frightening stuff that we know, as you've alluded to there, that is going on behind the scenes. It's almost like, well, we'll throw the people who are, we'll throw some people under the bus, so to speak. You know, we'll throw the innocent folk first, or the people that the government or the you know, the mainstream media may have said there's a rumor or suspicion around. And what that actually stops doing, and we are still waiting in the UK for this as well. We're still waiting for an internal investigation into these things that happened in the 80s. Yet we're happy to throw any kind of media entertainment star under the bus. And is there an element there of them, like saying, you were talking about this, Cara, I want to go into this idea of magic. Is this all designed to almost to give us the idea of giving us what we want, but actually not giving us what we need?
Well, that's old Frankfurt School technique. I mean, that was developed in America in the 20th century. People would go they ran experiments in factories where they realized if they gave the factory workers just a little bit of control over what they were doing, that they would feel like they had some control over their lives. That's just Frankfurt School manipulation there. That's global. That's just the technique that's been used on us all the time, you know. Well, I will tell you what my opinion, my view, my observation, and others whom I actually trust their opinions is that, for example, in the United States, there are two gangs at war with each other right now. One's headed by the Clintons and one's headed by Trump. This is a gang war, guys. This is a gang war in the United States for people to see who will regain control, okay? And there is a faction of what you might call the Illuminati. There's a faction of this level of folks that is no longer useful, that is archaic, and that is being thrown under the bus. That's why pedophilia is now being sort of, I mean, that's what that's about. These people are just being thrown under the bus. Okay, they're no longer useful. They're no longer of any, you know, import whatsoever in how whatever the structure is now. And essentially what we end up seeing is global gang war. Now, you know, the Pope is part of this, you know, the city of London's obviously part of this, that kind of thing. But what I see, what we see and what we hear about is this sort of gang war that's going on in the States.
Michael, thoughts on that sort of stuff?
Again, complete correlation with what Cara just said. It is all there will always be warring factions over control. That's how it's always been. Whether you're a king, whether you're a priest, whether you live in England, Spain, France, there's always been war. There's always been fractions. There's always been the desire to control everything. That is now different with. There are different cults. There are sun cults. There's moon cults. There's fertility cults. There's masculine fertility cults. There's all of these different factions that want to gain control of the world, and sometimes those schisms will just emanate into the public arena, and that's exactly what we're seeing in American politics.
Absolutely.
There's such a thing called the Hegelian dialect, which tells us that the human brain can only understand things in duality, in a polarity sense, and this is exactly what we're seeing. We are seeing this duality playing out because that's how the human brain can understand the reality that it's situated in.
Michael, the Neolithics used to describe the world in like 11, I guess, positive and negative terms. It was like light and dark, wet and dry, hot and cold. How exactly do we fight back against this? You know, how do we get to the future? You know, fighting against some of these things that you've just been mentioning.
Well, one of the main principal teachings of the ancients is the balance of self. And man or woman needs two environmental signals, which is the yang from above and the yin from below, in order to balance oneself. And the ancient principle is completely a balance. That balance, the balancing of opposites, the chemical marriage of king and queen, which is tying the knot, which is some of the term that we use in modern weddings today. Tying the knot is the balance of opposites. The cemetery is the balance of the two lands. It's all about equilibrium. The Egyptians had a quadrant system of consciousness. And the fourth member of that quadrant system was the cerebellum, which deals with equilibrium. And that is the death mask of King Tutankhamun. It's all about the balance of opposites. And once we can actually balance self, then that duality becomes that singularity once again, and everything becomes one. But we must, taking the ancient principles in mind, we must, if we want to get back to the God state, if we want to cross that Red Sea to get from inner consciousness to outer consciousness, first balance self, and that is how we can fight back.
Talking about balancing self there, is it inevitable that there will always be light and darker, and no matter how much we try to move towards, let's say, the goodness, the light, are we ultimately going to be locked into this battle as long as we're here on the physical?
Well, light and dark is simply different scales of the same frequency wavelength.
Yeah.
So it depends upon which side of that frequency wavelength you wish to sort of vibrate in. There is an inevitability that the universe is singularity repeating itself, going back to singularity, where the parallels and where the dense matter and where the time and space continuum become irrelevant because it becomes singularity once again. Singularity removes duality. And that is what we're striving for. We're heading to go back to that point of singularity where duality is no longer that game, where this is no longer that test, and it is no longer that simulator.
Rachel, you've got a big job on your hands, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah, I seem to be walking this path. It's just like everybody else was saying, this life kind of leads you on this path, and here I am, and I'm just trusting each step really, and who comes along. And I can't say that I know what the final outcome is. I just trust that it's all going to work out for the best.
It brings us nicely back to this idea, I guess, of roles and not really knowing that you're on a path, but not knowing ultimately what the path is. Are we destined to be smaller parts of a bigger picture? Are we destined to be just really playing our role within the orchestra in order to bring about these changes?
Yeah, I think we all have our part to play on a third dimensional level. Yeah, definitely. But we're also whole and complete in ourselves. As Micheal was saying, that's what we need to return to and remember. And one individual can have the power to completely change the whole game. And my strong purpose feels at the moment to kind of help people remember that we lost it and we need to remember it.
Steve, it sounds like you're going to be busy as well, Steve, in the next 30 years.
30 years. Oh yeah. Well, I'm waiting for my grandkids to grow up and then they have kids. Yeah. I think the mission is, of course, for our own awakening. But as I said earlier, it's going to be around sharing it with others. And I slightly disagree with the idea of fighting the dark. I don't think it's ever a good idea. I kind of like the idea of Neo when he was fighting the agents in the Matrix. They were kind of bashing him around, and they want us to fight them actually. But I think it's not about just kind of ignoring them, but it's about kind of going above them and beyond or through them, transcend them in a way. Bring awareness and consciousness and say no to what they're doing. But the moment we keep putting energy and fighting them, they love it. They want you to lock horns with them energetically. And I've done it a few times. I'm Scorpio rising with a bit of Scorpio in my energy field. So I'm going to go straight back at them. But, I've had people come to me who've had the darks kick them left, right, and center. And, in my life, I've had that as well. And I've a few times, gone down the legal route, fought stuff, but at the end you get exhausted, you get worn out. And actually what I realized is those points of choice now, I mean, the last time when I had this choice point of shifting out of my old life, again there was a fight starting up where the dark were kind of coming in and wanted a good fight. And I thought, breathe, don't lock horns with them. What am I here to do? Just let them go. It takes two to play tennis. If the dark kind of starts serving you tennis balls and you whack them back, it's kind of natural we want to whack them back. But the moment we do that, we're in a game with them. We just want to kind of, I ain't playing with you anymore. I'm going to go and do something much more meaningful over there. And so I encourage people not to fight the dark, however tempting it is, not to lock horns with them. Of course, to have courage and speak out. I mean, we're all speaking out here what we believe to be true. I don't believe by saying this I'm in a fight with them. I'm just saying what's true. I don't care if people believe it or not. A lot of people will be touched by what we say. Some will think it's nonsense. That's fine. It's not about not taking action in the world. It's almost an internal state of, am I going to put my fists up and going to fight these guys? Because ultimately, in their dojo, they will win. You can't fight them on their terms. You have to kind of leave their dojo and start putting your energy into projects and enterprises like this show we're doing here, which is going to affect and uplift a lot of people. If we're fighting with these guys, we'll be kind of every night dragging ourselves in the bed exhausted. It's not a good idea to fight the dark. I never encourage it.
You think that's air you're breathing? Wasn't that Morpheus's words? Do you think that's air you're breathing? Is that the reality then, Cara, Micheal? Gandhi said this, didn't he? Be the change you want to see in the world. Is that how, if you will, we fight back then? And I say, no, you're right about what you say.
You put your toys down, you walk away, and you build something new.
Yes.
He's right. I mean,
Yeah.
End of story. I don't want, this is when we get so sucked into the political narrative and blah, 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 blah. The reality is you got to just drop the toys and walk away and come up with something new. All right.
Will we have a situation then whereby, I mean, Cara, because I'm interested in your work with the Fae as well, and what that means, because the idea that there may be beings that have existed all of the entire time we've been on this planet that are just beyond the veil, are they part and parcel of this planet, or perhaps in Michael's aspect, are they a seed race from another planet?
Of course they are. They are a seed race. Well, they are the first seed race after Source. So you really can't say they're from another planet. Some of the older ancient Irish texts, Michael may know about this, suggest that a seed race landed from a nearby universe. Okay. Yes, they're part of the planet. Yes, they came here as the original seed race. They were creators. They sang things into, I mean, they used frequency. That's one of the things that has happened to us, is we've become schooled in this idea that which is natural, that we can do ourselves, or that which we find already here, is somehow archaic or less than, or when in fact it's actually greater than. Okay, it's actually the most powerful, the most magical. So they came here during this is an incarnation of the planet. The planet has had several incarnations. Okay, my view is that there was a diaspora, not a negative one, but there was a diaspora that came from Ireland. I think that Tessarian and I agree about this on a few points, not on all the points, but that's not supposed to happen. There was a global civilization. There was a global civilization, in my view, till just a few hundred years ago. You guys know who Sylvia Ivanova is on the her New Earth work. I'm very much a student of that work as well. I think that there was a global civilization, taking into account that, yes, there was a catastrophe about 10, 12,000 years ago. Okay, but there was a global advanced civilization covering this planet until just a few hundred years ago. All right, 200, 300, 400 years ago, when the social engineering got ramped up so intensely, all right, particularly post 1805 with the Prussian education system and all of the industrial revolutions and all that. 200, 300, 400 years ago, those who had arrived later and hijacked the system, we also called them, some people call them the Draco. They left. They weren't interested in being here in the way that they'd been here before. And there were human sort of, what do you want to call them? Business partners, perhaps. They were given the option of telling all of humanity what had been going on and sharing all of the technology and just making a go of it. And they opted, what do you think they chose? What do you think they chose?
The wrong option.
They chose to keep it for themselves. And that is when the demonic levels of social engineering kicked in, because they had to keep us from figuring out what was going on. So my view is that there's been amazing global civilizations all over this planet for a very long time that we can trace back to the Fae, which may be 300 million years ago. I don't know. I mean, the origins of civilization on this planet keep getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Even Egypt, right, Michael? How far back has that been pushed in like the last decade? Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? Yeah.
Guys, just to wrap up then, we've got a couple of minutes left. Michael, I'll come to you quickly. Just some final thoughts for us, buddy.
My final thoughts, I'll give you some strong words, which is...
Oh, yes, let's go.
We're fighting the fires while we're feeding the flames. And to add mine out to that, we need to stop feeding the flames.
No idea what song that was. I really probably should know as well. Steve, have you got any lyrics for us? Do you want to sing?
Lyrics? Oh my gosh. No. But I would say that the message I have for people is, even though the world looks dark, do not worry about the world.
Yes.
Everything is actually all right. It's, even though we've been talking about some dark stuff, it's actually a message of hope. I think all of us are bringing that, you know, there's an awakening. There's all kinds of threads of light opening up. It's like kind of tree roots under the ground. You know, you can't stop it. And, you know, the Trumps and all the stuff going on here, they'll be gone and they'll be forgotten about in a few decades, really.
Absolutely. Rachel, as I said before, you've got loads of work to do, you. But what you do is brilliant because it brings people like this together. It allows people to explore their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own experiences, and really to open themselves up, doesn't it? And that's how we're going to get to the future ultimately, I think, as well.
Yeah, what is possible? It's endless.
Rachel, where can people find tickets? It's Eventbrite, isn't it? So it's the Multidimensional Show.
Right, but, if you go to the main website, you'll see the link on there. Just go to multidimensionalshow.co.uk and just click on the speakers or the events tab at the top, and you'll see a link there saying book now, and it'll take you to the event.
Brilliant. It's the 12th of May as well, 9 o'clock till 5:30. It's King's Heath, Birmingham, isn't it? Is it the same lovely little church you were in before? Or the same sort of
centre near the church, yeah, All Saints Church. It's next door to the church, and it's got a labyrinth outside, so I love that place.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I forgot about that. I was kind of running around there while I was having some food last time I was there. Kind of enjoyed it. So it's a lovely venue as well. It's really cool. Guys, thanks ever so much for joining us this evening on the Asylum. Fascinating conversation. Like I say, really, and I think you all agree, as you've just said, a message of hope as opposed to, yes, there are some difficult and dark things, but I think ultimately we're headed towards the future, and that is inevitable, as you guys have quite clearly pointed out today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Wicked. Thanks for speaking to us, guys. We'll catch up with you soon as well. Rachel, I'm definitely going to be there. So get the coffee ready, young lady.
Yes, so have your camera ready.
Oh yeah, gosh, yeah, blooming hell. I need to get a lot ready actually for that said. But yes, definitely. Thanks for joining us on the Asylum tonight, guys.
Excellent.
As well. But right, peace out, be lucky, take it easy, and I'll speak to you all soon.
The Asylum.